Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of She Talks Business. I have to tell you, I get email pitches on the daily from strangers telling me who should be on my show. And then every once in a while, a client sends me a gem of a guest idea for the show. And today we have Kristen Herwitz with us, and she was recommended by a previous guest, Jennifer McClanahan, and I am super happy to have her here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and
I,
appreciate Jennifer putting us in touch. Like, I love when the universe just connects good people.
yeah, me too. And, I think it took me like a nanosecond to say yes to having you on this season. This season is all about having the right advisors in your small business. And when Jennifer said, "Hey, if you're looking for another attorney, here's someone I work with who's really great." And I was like, "Oh, another attorney? Like, I already have three on the show, right?" But they're all three are for very different reasons, right? I have an immigration attorney, I have an international tax attorney, and later on today, I'm interviewing an IP attorney. And so when she sent me your website, I was fascinated. I'm just going to read it because you advise small businesses, typically BIPOC and or LGBTQIA plus. And so I think that that is just a really fascinating niche for an attorney to go into. So tell us a little bit about why you chose to target the those people. That sounds terrible. Why you chose to target this demographic to be your client base, why you're so passionate about helping them.
Well, the reason that I started my own law practice in the first place was because I had been working in-house as general counsel at BlogHer. And as part of that role, we were negotiating contracts with brands and folks that you now call influencers, but back then it was
Mm-hmm.
blogs and then, started to be social media. And every single time we had one of these incredible, back then for that network, mostly women, up and coming entrepreneurs. They probably wouldn't even have called themselves that. But every time we'd have a contract, they'd have so many questions about it and had no idea what was in it or how to protect themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I wasn't their lawyer. I was a lawyer for BlogHer, and I'm kind of trying to manage, different expectations and communication. But that was what really helped me realize there was an access need. And at that point, when I launched my law practice, I was focused more on women. And as I continue to serve folks and kind of expand my network, and certainly in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, I had started working with more values focused businesses,
Mm-hmm.
including a lot of Black women owned DEI firms.
Mm-hmm.
And I really just loved the intersection of values for me, as well as their values, and being able to go into these negotiations and conversations with other lawyers from a values-based perspective, which when I represent these clients, like I feel like I have more direct and immediate impact because we don't know what we don't know, whether you're a lawyer or
Right.
not. And and I feel like it just helps me stay really grounded and rooted in my work as an attorney, which
Mm-hmm.
is tricky in the legal profession because lawyers are often very much divorced from the values or the whole point of the contract or the whole point of the relationship.
Yeah, it
And
can
so
be very
that's,
clinical, right?
yeah, and it's very like, this is our policy. We don't negotiate this stuff. I'm like, let's step back a little bit and think about like what is that policy really rooted in, and why are we kind of standing on that policy? Where did it come from? And so that's a lot of the type of work that these clients would go in and do, trying to bring about organizational change from an equity perspective. But it really starts with the contract, which is defining how that relationship is going to be. And are we starting on an even foot or closer to one?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, do you find that there are certain groups of people who are maybe, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally discriminated against in the contract process? Or do you find that maybe there's just a lack of understanding of how to read through a contract to make sure that it is fair and equitable for you? What has your experience been?
It's both. So like with any system, when you have more money, that's more power. So that
Right.
means, these big organizations who have a legal team, they can just kind of stand there like, well, this is our policy. Do you want to work with us or not? Do you want to get paid or not? And then the flip side of that is you've got these folks who are doing incredible work, can make incredible headway, even if that's an inch at a time, which equity work
Mm-hmm.
in particular often is. And they don't know what they should be looking out for in those contracts or what is actually negotiable. Like
Mm-hmm.
just the, to me, basic strategy of, oh, well, this is our policy, we don't negotiate it. I'm like, you will end up negotiating it when it's important to you. So
Right.
there are certain clauses that are pretty much always negotiable, and then there are other ones that you can push on and kind of see how they respond. And that might, even if you don't make headway in a contract negotiation, that still is information that's important to help you understand, like, is it worth it to take on these risks to work with this big client to get paid,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of make my way. And sometimes it is, especially earlier on in business or depending on, what that project is, and other times it's not.
I have to admit, I am guilty of having signed contracts without reading the fine print, without asking an attorney to read the fine print for me, and just making the assumption that it is what it is. If I want to do this, I need to
Mhm.
sign it. And I have also had that bite me in the ass where something has come up, and then later on, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I missed that line in the contract,
Mhm.
or I can't believe I was so naive as to just assume that this contract would be um, done in good faith, right? And
Mhm.
I think that there's a valuable lesson there that you can't assume. You really do need to have professional guidance on some of these things, and if you don't understand the legal jargon yourself, then you need to have somebody in your court that can help you to interpret those things. I think it's super important.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think every single day we're all clicking through websites and, a privacy policy thing comes up. Like, how many of us actually read it? Very few.
Right,
Even me as a lawyer, like I know that once my information's on the internet, it's going to travel to 18,000
right.
different sources. So you click through, you go access the site, you do the thing you need to do. But that's another example where every single day we're, agreeing to contracts without actually reading any of it.
Right, right. So, talk to me a little bit about some of the biggest challenges that you see when people are coming to you with their contracts. What are some of the things people should be looking out for where maybe they are being taken advantage of, or maybe they do have more power to question than what they realize?
It's a great question. So I would start with the idea that, like, why are we signing the contract? We're not
Hmm.
signing it because if everything goes well, you're never going to look at it again, right? You're signing it.
Right.
And if something goes wrong, you're going to have to look at it. So I think keeping that in the back of your mind, if we're trying to start in right relationship and stay in right relationship, we want to make sure that what's in there makes sense. And the most basic thing to think about is, again, what happens when something goes wrong. And so that would be, like payment related for small business owners in particular. That is, something that I see frequently where, especially folks in consulting or some sort of professional services work, will kind of give up all the goods and then collect the payment later or part of the payment later. And at that point, you don't have leverage. So if that company comes back and says, well, this isn't really what we wanted, or, actually, we want to cancel. Um, and that's not just for professional services, it's also for folks in like the event planning industry where
Hmm.
sometimes people hire event professionals not understanding that most of the work is done pre-event. The day of is, pretty minimal comparatively. So they think if they cancel pre-event, then they're going to save on the cost. And that's not how it works. And so if the invoice is to be paid post-event, we just want to make sure that the payment structure and timeline for the payments
Yeah.
makes sense based on kind of when you're giving up the value that you're providing. And
Hmm.
there's always, in my experience, a way to negotiate that, whether it's by collecting some amount upfront and maybe that's offset against a final invoice, or doing staggered payments, or if you can collect, I say, like, start from a place of strength. If you have a flat rate fee or some sense of what it's going to cost, like collect as much of that upfront as you can before you lose leverage. The other really crucial provision I would look at is how do you get out of the contract, or how can they get out of the contract? So we've all had a client or some sort of relationship that we go into, everyone has best intentions. And even if you've got both people in alignment, you think, and with good intentions, it turns out it's just not a good working relationship for whatever reason. So how can you get out of that? What payments are going to be owed? And that goes both directions, whether you're going to be paying someone to do work for your business or someone's paying you to do work for their business. And make sure that you've got the options that you need there, including some notice around, if there needs to be transition time because you're bringing someone on board to support with a specific project that's for a client. We want to make sure all of those relationships kind of flow through. So as an example, I was talking to a client last week who was trying to figure out, if she brings someone on to, or another company on to fulfill part of a contract, but they want to cancel, then like how much time is she going to need to kind of roll them off and transition so that it doesn't have a negative impact on the client, because she's going to have to outsource other people or bring on other people from her team to do more work then. And so, in that case, I think we settled on like 6 weeks. Sometimes you only want to give a couple weeks notice. You can always be more lenient than your contract, but you can't be stricter than it. So nobody's going to be mad if you choose to be nicer. But
yeah,
thing to think about.
I think it's so important, especially, I mean, especially for women, and I'm using myself as an example, to really have guidance when we are creating contracts for our services, because I think, when you enter into a relationship with somebody, like you said, everything is good then. The contract isn't for when things are good. The contract is if things go sideways. And so really thinking about what is the worst case scenario that could happen in this situation, and how do I protect myself, but how do I do it in a way that is also fair? Because I think a lot of women are wanting to do the right thing, not necessarily take advantage of someone, but we can falsely believe that someone else wants to do the right thing too, and maybe they're not coming from the same values set that we are.
Yes. And I think that goes for anyone from, one or multiple marginalized groups, like tend to be socialized to kind of make accommodations and try to fit in and make everybody happy. And when we do that, we often accidentally compromise the things that we need to feel safe and secure, but also confident in being in that relationship. And so I think that's where, sometimes even if you don't have a lawyer do a full on review of a contract, if they can do a limited scope one or something, just so you have someone to bounce some thoughts off of, can be super helpful, because it's also that thing where we reflect back our values and our value to each other when we're working with other professionals collaboratively versus in isolation by ourselves. And sometimes we can accidentally negotiate against ourselves just by like, being like, okay, well, it's probably going to be fine. But
Yeah.
and I think particularly if you've got two folks from different marginalized backgrounds, women, Black, brown, otherwise, trying to come together, then both of them may be accidentally compromising things instead of actually having an intentional conversation at the outset, which can be so important, especially since a lot of us do get these personal recommendations from clients, from friends. We might collaborate with a friend.
Right.
And you want to protect that pre-existing relationship. Like that's more important than the business relationship that then comes later. So how can we make sure that if we do need to part ways on the business piece, we can still be friends? So that's another thing that I've seen folks run into when someone like no shows as a guest expert in their group, or
Right. I'm chuckling because for those of you listening, you can't see my coffee mug. If you're watching the video, you can, but my coffee mug says, "I'm not bossy, I'm aggressively helpful." And yet I'm sitting here listening to you speak, and I'm thinking, and I'm marginalized, and I don't even act like I'm marginalized, which is probably a mistake.
Well,
So
and I've got this coffee mug here.
I've got
I've gotten
99 problems.
in white
And heteronormative
heteronormative
patriarchy is
patriarchy is
basically
basically all of them. But it's a reminder that like sometimes like those of us who do still live in relative privilege, like I am white. I
Mhm,
have a level of financial privilege that is above most people. I am a lawyer, so I'm a licensed professional. So
mhm,
professionally, like I'm able to show up in ways that other folks are not. When I meet with my kid's teacher, they take me more seriously because they know that I'm a lawyer. And
mhm,
all of those privileges kind of hold weight in different ways to where I can forget,
mhm.
that I still have been socialized and conditioned certain ways. And I can still, every once in a while, accidentally compromise something. And then it comes around and bites me. And I'm like, okay, the universe is trying to remind me.
Yeah, no, 100%. And because I think for me, I I have a very strong personality, and I tend to be one of those people who can speak before they think instead of, I'm not one to hold my tongue, so to speak. I'm pretty good at speaking up for myself. But what I realize is that I'm also not reading my contracts line by line. And I'm
Mm,
also, so there are ways in which I am unintentionally, potentially letting myself be marginalized without even realizing that it's happening. And this is why having advisors in your business is so important, because they can help you see the blind spots. They can help you see things that you don't necessarily see yourself.
yes. And I think particularly with contracts or any legal system, really, when we're not familiar with
Mhm,
navigating those rules or those systems, it's even more crucial because having the right legal advisor on your team, just like having the right CPA to help you navigate tax strategy, it can save you a lot of headaches. It can also really help you strategize and grow your business in ways and monetize things that you wouldn't have thought about, or protect your cash flow up front instead of invoicing, after you've provided services. There are often like seemingly tiny tweaks that make a massive difference in the day to day and in the long term too. I think one of the things we didn't talk about, although you mentioned that you were going to be speaking to an intellectual property attorney, who I'm sure will have a lot
mhm,
more thoughts on this, but is the idea of like when you're signing a contract or someone's signing your contract, who's owning the thing that's being provided or created? Is that something
mm,
pre-existing? Is there something that's going to be collaboratively created? Who's owning that? Who can use it for how long? How is that going to be distributed? Can you sell it? Can you change it?
mhm.
And there's a lot of, and all of this needs to be in the contract around
Yeah.
licensing and intellectual property ownership. And one of the kind of most recent values-based examples that I can think of is with these Black and Brown women and LGBT folks who have these different values-based DEI type organizations and are going out and doing this very values heavy work that comes
Mhm,
with a lot of emotional labor, and including the intergenerational trauma that has been passed down through their families, the trauma that they have continued to experience just as marginalized folks in this world that we live in. And then the companies that they're signing contracts with are like, yeah, we own all that because you put it in some materials and we can distribute that and use it however you want. And I'm like, no, 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 no,
no,
no.
no, no.
First of all, like this is where the legal industry gets things really, really wrong, because that's the default policy and provisions for all
Right.
contractors. And that is something that every single time should be questioned and negotiated. Maybe different if you're, a branding and marketing firm who's going to be creating logos, then of course the company, needs to own those and be able
But
to
even
change them.
even then, I mean, I have a digital agency. Our team does web design and we do branding and we do all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I'm constantly having to explain to people is you own the end product, you don't own the layers. And
Yes.
so the working file is ours. And the best way that I explain it to someone is when you go to Capital Grill and you order their mashed potatoes, you get the mashed potatoes. You don't know how they made them. You don't know how they
Mm-hmm.
made them so creamy and so garlicky and cheesy and yummy. All you
Mm-hmm.
know is that you got the mashed potatoes. They don't have to give you the recipe, and they don't have to show you exactly step by step how to make them. That's not what you paid for. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's one of the things that we've run into before where people have asked us, they want the working files for their website, or they want the working files for all the graphic design work. And we have to go back and explain that's not what you paid for. And so
Mm-hmm.
while our contracts say that, in some cases, I mean, I think I'm going to get you to review a contract, to be perfectly honest. But I think in some cases, we're not explaining it in a way that, because you also don't want to come across as the bad guy. Yeah, you don't own the working file. You just get the end result. Like, it's got to be communicated in a way that if you want the working file, you can have the working file, but you have to pay extra for it, because there's a difference between eating, I don't know, I'm blanking on a famous chef, but if there's a difference between eating a famous chef's meal and sitting in the kitchen with the famous chef and having him show you how to cook the meal.
Yes, exactly. And I think the nuance that you mentioned there between like, sure, you could have the working file, that's going to cost you extra. It's the same, with any other service provider. Like there can be nuances. We can find a way to say yes where it feels good to have an
Mm-hmm.
option to say yes, and communicate that in a way that is clear to the client, kind of what the boundaries are or what the additional
Mm-hmm.
costs are going to
Yeah.
be. If they said they wanted the sun and now they want the moon and the stars in the entire universe, maybe we can't give them the whole universe, but we could give them the moon and the stars also for this
Mm-hmm.
additional cost. And I think
Yeah.
that's also a thing where at the outset in the contract, or even before you get to the contract stage, when you're just putting packages or options in front of them, you can ask them, like, is that important to you to own the working files as well? Here is what that means. And it's like
Right.
some basic communication at the outset, which also doesn't necessarily mean that they communicate that with their entire team. But at least if you put that in front of them, and if the
Mm-hmm.
contract has some clear language that you can point back to, um, it's helpful to everybody, because it
Mm-hmm.
helps minimize that situation later where they're like, wait, we thought we got everything. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you paid for
And
this.
then there's also, a whole other layer of complexity when it comes to hiring employees and the
Mm-hmm.
employment contracts. I know in my business, we have basically non-solicitation and compete agreements. I mean, if you're a designer, you can obviously go be a designer someplace else, but we have contracts that state that everything basically, from our business, is there's a confidentiality agreement and there's a non-solicitation agreement. You can't go solicit business from people that you met through our business for a certain period of time. And yet I've had situations where people leave and all of a sudden they're putting stuff up on social media as though that was their client. And I'm having to go, knock, knock. You can't do that. That's not your
Mm-hmm.
client. That's my client. And you were a paid employee. You were paid to do that work inside of this company, and this
Mm-hmm.
company owns the client. Your small business that you've just started since then does not own that client.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I mean, you have to do your due diligence. I have caught employees who have left the organization using my customer testimonials on their website. And I've had to go, knock, knock, you're not allowed to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's another layer, right? Where you need to protect your business in some cases from your employees too.
Yes, and I think that's where I like to proceed from like the initial assumption that folks are well intentioned and like
Yeah.
they're trying to do their best with the information that they have. They don't have a lot of
Yes.
information. People don't understand copyright and trademark law. So, taking the client's testimonials, using any of the client branding or screenshots of the
Yeah.
websites and stuff like that. That isn't just an issue for your firm as their previous employer. That also causes an issue with the end client
Right.
there. So it's not protecting that relationship, and it's violating copyright and trademark laws. And so, but like most people don't understand that. They're like, oh, it's just like an example. I thought that I could use it.
Right.
I feel like a little bit of education can
Mm-hmm.
go a long way. And that's something where I'm not an employment lawyer, but I do have some general knowledge around
Mm-hmm.
that, where having some stuff in your employee handbook, having, you
Yeah.
know, certain kind of routine around the offboarding process can also help just kind of remind folks how to stay on the up and up,
Yeah. I think it would be
including
good
if
to
there
put it
are,
into layman's terms.
yes, exactly, and put it into a form, you know, contract or otherwise. A contract does not have to be written in a way that, you know, needs to be deciphered by a lawyer. That's something that I feel like doesn't serve most small business owners or any of the folks who are signing their
Mm-hmm.
contracts or that they're signing with. It should be written in a way where people can understand that. And also, if it's like a 20-page contract or something, like our brains start shutting off after
Right.
like page 2 or 3. So maybe there's like a reminder, like a little checklist, like
Mm-hmm.
here are things you can do after employment, or we're okay with, and you have permission to do these things, you know, to speak
Mm-hmm.
about your experience here. These are things that you can't do.
Yeah. And there are also I've often thought about having our clients something like that built into our client agreements, that you
Mm-hmm.
can't actually solicit business from our employees, because
Yes.
it goes two ways, right? And of course, I'm learning from all the things that have happened to me over,
Mm-hmm.
a decade plus, almost 2 decades in business, is that sometimes what happens is a client will see a team member leave and they like that team member. So now they think if they go direct, they can get a better deal. They can get that team
Mm-hmm.
member to work for them, and they can cut some costs. And meanwhile, the business has invested time, money, energy in training and developing and building that team member's skill sets. And so it's kind of a two-way street, right? It's challenging to be able to protect both sides, but as a business owner, you want to do as much as you can to dissuade people from doing things like that.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing to think about too, I think with any of these contracts, it's like, yes, what is like the web or network of relationships
Mm-hmm.
that are involved? Because you could have like the business, the end client, a contractor, employee, a vendor. Like there can be multiple different people that are kind of all involved in creating the
Mm-hmm.
end product, or, you know, whatever it is deliverable for that client. And we want to make sure that we're protecting the client's rights throughout that. We want to make sure we're protecting our own businesses. We want to make sure that we're, you know, protecting the employees too, you know, from getting like directly harassed from our
Right.
clients and things like that. So um, these are all things that can be kind of put in contracts and navigated. Um, and I think with the non-solicitation piece in particular, the important thing to think about with employees or contractors is also like there are different state laws that apply depending on where
Mm-hmm.
folks are located. And for California, as an example, since that's where I'm licensed, because of laws in recent years, you know, there is kind of this heavy presumption in favor of classifying anyone who does kind of work for your business as an employee, unless they fit into, you know, any number
Mm-hmm.
of exceptions and check all these boxes. But something like a non-solicitation or non-compete clause can really throw a wrench in that classification and expose small businesses to you know, claims of, you know, unemployment, or that, you know, they just weren't paid as
Right.
employees. And it takes, you know, about 30 seconds to file a claim online. And most employment lawyers will advise you to like not fight it. But, you know, this is not legal advice and I'm not an
Right.
employment lawyer, because it can just become so expensive so quickly. So I think
Right.
that's where also having a lawyer who's knowledgeable about the state laws for
Right.
both your business and wherever
Mm-hmm.
that employee or contractor is located is really, really important to make sure you're on the up and up with that stuff.
Right. And I think that comes back to your conversation about values. What are your
Mm-hmm.
values? I mean, if I think about
Mm-hmm.
myself, I'm not trying to prevent somebody from making a living.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to protect what I think is rightfully mine to protect in my business. I'm also
Mm-hmm.
trying to protect, my clients, their privacy and their
Yes.
reputation. Because
Mm-hmm.
if all of a sudden some freelancer who doesn't have the reputation that maybe I have in my business starts saying that they did business for so and so, it could negatively impact that customer's reputation because it's not necessarily true, right? So there's all these
Mhm.
different things that you need to consider. And I think that if you look at them through the lens of values, what's the
Mhm.
best outcome for everyone involved versus what's the best outcome for me involved, and you end up creating something that is more equitable for everyone.
Yes, and I think that that's where a lot of times I'll say, look, like the state laws around stuff are usually like the most baseline and not necessarily even close to an alignment with your values. So
Mm-hmm.
that's like the minimum or maximum that you can, kind of work with, but we want to work within those. But then how can we be creative to make sure that those relationships are still being protected and
Mm-hmm.
also elevated in alignment with values? Certainly, when someone comes on board your team as an employee or as a freelancer and gets access to your systems, to all your clients' information, including contact information, um, there's a major potential breach of privacy, data,
Mm-hmm.
confidentiality provisions that you have in that contract with your client if, that freelancer goes and then spreads
Yeah.
that information or contacts them
Yeah.
directly or, starts spamming them,
Mm-hmm.
which certainly happens. So we want to make sure we're kind of protecting the relationships in ways that make sense and like feel
Mm-hmm.
good to us because
Mm-hmm.
we don't really start our own businesses to feel bad about things. That tends to be more of an employee situation when you work for a big corporation
Yeah.
versus small business owners. We want to feel good about the work that we're doing. That's important to us. We're
Yes.
very much um, values driven and also just driven by like some sense of purpose in what we're kind
Yeah.
of putting out into the world. So,
Absolutely. So I have one final question for you. When I was poking around your website, I noticed that you offer flat free, smaller dollar, and DIY contract services to people. That's not typical for an
no.
attorney. So talk to me a little bit about why you do that, and what was your intention behind that, and how has that served you in your business?
Yeah, so I started working on a flat rate basis for a lot of contract projects about 5 years ago. And it helps. And one of the common complaints I get from folks when they've worked with a lawyer, which a lot of the folks I work with have not, but the ones that have, is like the lawyer said they were going to do this thing. They get this massive bill. They have no idea what that was for. They still didn't get the thing. And I think, there are some situations where that makes sense, like litigation,
Hmm.
negotiations that are kind of going on and on. But when we're talking about a contract that's like protecting your main revenue source for your business or your relationship with a freelancer, um, there's no reason that it should cost you like ten or $15,000. So so that's where it kind of started from a values oriented place where clients can budget for this stuff. And the way that I put together packages these days usually is some combination of flat rate, might be client, it might be contract writing or negotiation work, and then a kind of support and services plan that folks can use throughout the course of the year. And when folks sign up for that, then they also get access to a payment plan so that they can spread the cost of legal over the course of a year, just like any other thing that you put in your budget for your business.
Hmm.
Um, the way most law firms work, for anyone who's listening and is not familiar, is they usually take about a $10,000 retainer upfront just to start work. And there's maybe an estimate sometimes provided. Often there's no obligation to stick to that. They can blow way over that. The communication is lacking. And those things all just go against my values. And also, it doesn't make sense for the kind of work that I want to do or how I want to work with folks.
Hmm.
It doesn't make sense for the clients. It's not sustainable. And that's probably why a lot of law firms have many
Hmm.
clients that are more than 90 days in arrears.
Hmm.
Um, and it also allows me to expand access to the types of small business owners that I want to work with who traditionally do not have unlimited access to funds, either through their own personal savings or through, venture capital or other kind of investor money
Hmm.
raising opportunities. They're making hard decisions every single day about how they spend their budget, and this helps them get the things they need when they need them. And it just helps it be a continuous, mutually supportive relationship instead of
Mhm.
this transactional, like one
Mhm.
time, never see them again. They come back with some big problem because they didn't feel like they could afford to ask a question because the last
Mhm.
email they sent cost them,
$500.
700. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what did I get for that?
I
Like
know. I
a
know.
one-line
I know.
email response.
Yeah, I hear you. I have received those invoices and I'm like, what was that for?
Yeah.
So I get it. Well, I love, one of my favorite quotes is from Sally Hogshead, who wrote the book Fascinate. And the quote is, different is better than better. And I feel like your business is so different from the traditional, small business attorney out there. I love that you are, focused on helping, marginalized people. I love that you are loud and proud about wanting to help BIPOC and LGBTQ. I think it's a really great space. And I think it's really great for people to have an advocate and an advisor that cares about how they're marginalized, because I think then you develop a lot of subject matter expertise that can really help those people. And when when you I had a conversation with a guy one time when we were buying this house. Actually, it was the vice president of the firm that built the house, and I was having a disagreement about something with him. And he said to me at the end of the conversation, he said, well, you have my number. If you ever need anything, just call me. And I said, why? So you can mansplain me again? I don't think so. And so I think that when you understand the specific needs of, women who have been marginalized, or people of color who have been marginalized, or, people that are LGBTQ that have had the same types of things happen, you start to develop a much deeper understanding of what goes on for these people specifically and individually, and then you can actually support them better because you're not treating everybody the same. You're actually going deeper with certain
Mhm.
people to really understand what life is like for them and how to look out for them, and that makes you a better advisor to them than if you're just an advisor to everyone.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the cookie cutter advice, just like the cookie cutter contracts that most lawyers and law firms are kind of spewing out, often don't do the things that the small business clients,
Mm-hmm.
particularly folks with marginalized backgrounds, tend to need to
Mm-hmm.
feel safe in business, because the way that we navigate the world is just inherently less safe because the systems that are in place were built to keep us down and to
Right.
keep us complacent and to keep us,
Mm-hmm.
keeping everyone else happy except ourselves. And so I think when you've got folks that have really amazing ideas or for products or services, or really showing up in ways that are changing the world, one client or one, transaction or one product at a
Mm-hmm.
time, I think that customized advice that really is rooted in their values and how they actually have to live and navigate the
Mm-hmm.
world every single day. The fact that, a Black woman who goes into a conversation with a big tech company is going to be treated differently than I would be if I went in there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Or another white dude.
or yeah, and so how do I, like, how do we need to kind of adjust the stance or adjust the terms or adjust the conversation
Mm-hmm.
to really make sure that she kind of ends up where she needs to be, in a place where she can thrive, not
Mm-hmm.
just barely, get the business and then be mistreated.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're doing. I think it is really important. And I'm really glad that Jennifer told me about you. And I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your experience and your expertise with our listeners. I'm sure that there are lots of people that have gotten a lot of value from this conversation. And I just really want to say thank you for what you do and for spending time with me today.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate you having me on. And again, like, so glad every time the universe connects people, like through my clients, through friends, like it's just wonderful to continue expanding, the folks that we know.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you are looking for information on how to contact Kristen, you will find them in the show notes. And we will see you again next week. Thanks for listening to She Talks Business.